The sun had barely pushed its way over the Texas horizon when Gerald Matheson turned off the cracked engine of his aging station wagon. The vehicle coughed, sputtered once, then settled into silence like it was relieved. He sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes studying the reflection in the smudged rearview mirror. What he saw didn't look like a CEO. Not anymore. Wrinkled cheeks, stubble that had gone white, and tired eyes. His once golden hair was now a salt and pepper mess tucked under a baseball cap that had seen better years. Gerald wasn't just dressed like someone down on his luck, he was living the part. The hoodie he wore had a rip under one arm. His jeans were saggy and stained at the knees. The canvas bag on the passenger seat looked like it had been dragged through dust and rain. He leaned back, took a breath, and exhaled with the weight of a man about to walk into a world he built, but now barely recognized. This was his test. Not a boardroom experiment, not some performance review. This was a gut check. See, Gerald was the founder and CEO of a wildly successful retail chain that had grown from a small Midwestern store into a nationwide brand. Decades ago, he'd run the cash register himself, stayed late to clean floors, even delivered goods to homes. He built everything on the belief that people mattered, especially the ones who walked through the front doors looking like they didn't. Lately, though, things had changed. Anonymous complaints from customers, whispers about poor treatment, store managers brushing it off. Gerald didn't want to believe it, but a voice in his head whispered, "You've gotten too far from the floor." So he did what most CEOs wouldn't. He dressed down, looked rough, skipped shaving for a few days, and drove himself to the store outside Dallas, the first one he ever opened outside his home state. It had been his big gamble 10 years ago, and it paid off, financially at least. Emotionally, he wasn't so sure anymore. Gerald pulled the hood up on his sweatshirt and grabbed his bag. He walked across the parking lot unnoticed, just another scruffy old man with slow steps and stiff joints. The store looked the same as he remembered it. Polished windows, the logo beaming confidently, doors sliding open with a whoosh. Inside, it smelled of plastic and perfume and processed air. It was busy already. Parents herding noisy kids, carts clattering, the crackle of intercom announcements. Employees in matching striped vests moved around, some with purpose, others pretending to be busy. Gerald slowed his pace, absorbing it all. He smiled at a toddler who waved at him from a cart. The mother quickly turned the cart away, eyes barely masking discomfort. He made his way toward electronics. A younger man, maybe 22, stood behind the counter scrolling through his phone, earbuds hanging lazily around his neck. Gerald stood nearby, picked up a box of Bluetooth headphones, pretended to study it. He waited and waited, not even a glance. He cleared his throat gently and placed the box on the counter. The employee looked up, clearly annoyed. "Yeah? I was wondering if these are good for outdoors," Gerald said kindly. Maybe?" The kid didn't even read the box, just shrugged. "Could you maybe check? I'd like to be sure." Sigh, flip, glance. "Says they're weatherproof," the kid muttered, already looking back at his phone. Gerald nodded slowly. "Are they compatible with different phones?" The boy rolled his eyes, waved vaguely at the box. "You can read, right?" Gerald stared at him for a long second. It wasn't the words, it was the tone, the disregard, the quiet message. "You're not worth my time." He looked around. A young woman in the next aisle was helping a teenage girl and her mom pick out phone cases, chatting warmly. Another employee was assisting an elderly man with a walker. Then there was him, standing alone, being treated like a burden. The worst part? He wasn't even surprised. Not yet ready to confront anything, Gerald walked away and wandered into housewares. He picked up a mug, turned it over. From behind him, he heard laughter. Quiet, but sharp. "Guy like that ain't buying anything," said a voice. "Young, male." "Yeah," said another. Probably just here to use the bathroom or steal napkins. Gerald didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He felt the words sink into his chest like a dull nail being pushed inward. That kind of judgment? He'd seen it before. Years ago. When he actually was broke. When people looked right through him. But these boys weren't customers. They wore the company logo on their chests, and they were mocking their own boss, unknowingly. He kept walking, the mug still in his hand, though he no longer cared what it cost. He needed to know more. Gerald moved deeper into the store, the mug now resting quietly in his bag as he entered the clothing section. His heart was still tight in his chest, but his expression stayed calm. Years of running a company had taught him how to keep a steady face, even when storms were breaking inside him. This section felt warmer. The lighting was softer, the shelves neatly arranged. A young Latina employee stood by a folded display of polos, humming lightly to herself as she stacked shirts. She looked up when Gerald approached and smiled. A real one. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Let me know if I can help with anything." Gerald gave her a nod, his voice low. "Thanks. I'm just looking." "No worries," she replied, kindly. "I'll be right here if you need me." There was no hesitation in her tone, no suspicion, no disinterest. Just a simple human gesture. It felt like a breath of air after walking through a room of smoke. He lingered, pretending to browse. She didn't push, just continued her folding, occasionally checking in with a soft glance. Moments later, an older gentleman shuffled over, struggling with a walking cane and a frustrated expression. The young woman turned her attention immediately to him. "Hey there. Can I help you find something?" "I'm trying to get something for my grandson," the man muttered. He's a teen. Want something cool? I don't even know what that means anymore." She laughed, not at him, but with him. "You're in luck. I'm pretty good at teen cool." "What's his size?" They talked for a few minutes. She walked him around the table, suggesting a navy hoodie, then picked out a matching cap. "Trust me," she said. "This combo? Instagram-worthy." The old man chuckled. "Well, I'll take your word for it." Watching the scene unfold brought a flicker of something back to Gerald, hope. Maybe not everyone in his company had forgotten the values. Maybe there were still people in the trenches doing it right. But that hope didn't last long. As he moved past the kitchen section, his ears picked up another exchange. Two boys leaned lazily against a shelf stacked with dish racks. One of them nodded in Gerald's direction, whispering just loud enough for him to catch. "That guy still here? What's he doing, casing the place?" "Bet he stinks. You smell that? Like beer and dirt." They both snickered, and one elbowed the other. "Watch him walk out with something in his pocket." Gerald's teeth clenched, his spine straightened, a little. These weren't just insensitive remarks. They were assumptions, judgments made instantly, based on clothes, posture, hell, probably just age. He wasn't a person to them. He was a warning sign. He didn't turn around, didn't say a word. He simply kept walking, quieter now, more thoughtful. These boys weren't just rogue actors. They were comfortable saying these things out loud. That meant they hadn't been checked. No one had corrected them. And that meant the culture somewhere, down the line, had cracked. Near the front of the store, he spotted another familiar face, the kind-faced cashier from earlier. Her name tag read Denise. She was helping a middle-aged woman with coupons, her tone patient, even as the customer flipped through her purse at a glacial pace. When it was finally Gerald's turn to approach, Denise greeted him with a smile. "Fine. Everything okay, sir?" He paused, then placed the mug on the counter and gently shook his head. "Not exactly." She tilted her head slightly, concerned. "I'm sorry to hear that. Was something wrong with the product?" "No," he said. "Not the product." He held her gaze for a second. There was something grounding about her, something that reminded him of people from the early days, the employees who'd stay late just to make sure the store looked perfect. The next morning, people who didn't see customers as obstacles or wallets, but people. "Well," she said softly, "if there's anything I can do—" "You already did," he replied. "Thank you." She looked a little puzzled, but smiled again. Gerald stepped outside into the rising heat of the afternoon, his steps slower now, not from age but weight. The kind of weight that didn't settle in your bones but in your soul. He stood by his car for a long time, watching the doors slide open and closed as people came and went. His people. His store. But today, he didn't feel proud. He felt ashamed, not of the cashiers or the floor displays, not even the customers. He was ashamed that he hadn't noticed it sooner, that he'd let distance replace presence. He used to walk the aisles every weekend, used to know every name on every badge. Now he was just another stranger, and it took pretending to be homeless to learn how his company really treated strangers. Inside, people were being kind, and people were being cruel. But they all wore the same logo. That made the problem his. He climbed into the car and opened the glove box, pulled out a battered notebook and uncapped a pen. Then, in his neat old man handwriting, he wrote 4 words across a blank page. "It starts with me." The words Gerald had scribbled down, "It starts with me," kept echoing in his mind as he sat in the car with the windows rolled up, sweat gathering at his temples. It wasn't just a sentence anymore. It felt like a confession. A man who once built his company on the strength of human connection, now realized he'd let parts of it rot behind a curtain of distance and growth. He flipped the notebook open again and began listing what he saw. The dismissiveness, the sarcasm, the open judgment from employees too comfortable in their roles. Then on the next page, he jotted something else. Denise, redeeming light. She had treated him with dignity, just like the young woman folding shirts. There were people doing it right. But the poison didn't need a full river. It only needed a few drops in the right place to infect the whole stream. That's when he made the decision. He didn't want to call HR. Didn't want to write some vague executive memo about elevated expectations. He was going back in. But this time, he wouldn't be browsing. He wouldn't be pretending. He'd show them exactly who he was. He stepped out of the car, this time with purpose in his stride. Same hoodie, same torn jeans, same canvas bag. But now his spine was straighter, his face no longer guarded. The fear was gone. Only resolve remained. Inside, he went straight to the customer service counter and asked to speak to the store manager. The young man behind the desk didn't even blink at his appearance. "1 sec," he said, picking up the phone. A few minutes. Later, a man in his 40s approached from the back hallway. He looked professional, pressed khakis, short-sleeve button-down, name tag reading Brian. He looked at Gerald with polite indifference, clearly expecting a customer complaint about a missing receipt or a bad return. "Hi, I'm Brian. How can I help?" Gerald extended a hand. "Gerald Matheson." Brian took the hand with hesitation, his brow furrowing slightly. "I'm sorry. Should I know that name?" "I started this company." Brian blinked. It was like someone flipped a switch inside. His hand stiffened. His face went pale, then flushed. "You're that Gerald Matheson?" "I am." Brian stepped back slightly, eyes wide. I had no idea you were visiting. If I'd known, I would have—" "That's the point, Brian." Gerald interrupted gently. "You weren't supposed to know." The silence that followed was heavy. Brian swallowed hard. "Was there an issue?" Gerald didn't raise his voice, didn't act dramatic. He didn't need to. There were several. He walked Brian through what he'd experienced. The indifference from the electronics clerk, the crude jokes from the boys in home goods, the visible favoritism toward customers who didn't look like him that day. He painted the picture carefully, deliberately, word by word. And Brian listened. And with each detail, his face sagged a little more with dread. "This isn't just bad service," Gerald said softly. "It's rot. It's a mindset. It's something we promised would never happen in this company." Brian looked devastated. I take full responsibility, sir. I really do try." "I believe you," Gerald said. "But belief isn't enough. Intentions don't fix culture. We've got a problem, Brian, and fixing it starts right here. Today." Brian nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Call." "A meeting," Gerald replied. "Right now. Everyone on shift. Break room. I'll speak to them." 15 minutes later, the staff began trickling into the small, fluorescent-lit break room. Most were chatting casually, still unaware of who the older man was standing near the vending machine. A few recognized him from old press articles. A few others looked confused. Some simply looked bored. Brian stood beside Gerald, then cleared his throat. "Everybody, this is Gerald Matheson. He's the founder of the company." Silence. All heads turned. The mood flipped instantly. Gerald took a breath, then stepped forward. "I came here today looking like someone you wouldn't recognize. Because I wanted to see the store as it really is. Not as a CEO, not in a suit. Just as someone walking through the door like anybody else." His eyes scanned the room. Some people looked down at their shoes. Others froze in place. "What I saw wasn't what I built this company to be." He let the silence linger for a beat, then continued. "Some of you did what we ask of everyone. Treating people with dignity, with kindness, no matter what they look like or how they speak. But others failed. Not just a little. They failed. Big. Failed as employees, and more importantly, as human beings." He looked directly at the electronics clerk, who now looked pale and trapped. He didn't need to say his name. The look was enough. "I don't want excuses. I want accountability." The room remained quiet. Even the vending machine seemed to stop humming. This store, and every store that carries our name, has one. Rule above all. People first. Not appearance, not assumptions. People. He took a step back. "This isn't a firing squad. I'm not here to shame anyone. But I am here to fix what's broken." Some staff nodded. Some didn't move. But all of them knew. Things would never be the same after today. The silence in the break room clung to the air like thick smoke. Gerald could feel the tension. Not anger, yet, but discomfort, confusion, and from some, shame. That was good. Discomfort meant they were listening. And shame? That meant at least a few knew they had something to reckon with. He leaned his hand on a plastic table. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his voice low and even. "I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in change." Somebody shifted in their seat. Another employee coughed softly. The young man from electronics, now visibly sweating, kept his eyes on the floor. Gerald didn't call him out again. No need to. The message was already written all over the kid's posture. He turned to Brian. "This starts at the top. Not with just one store, but all of them. But today we deal with this one." Brian nodded. "Absolutely." Gerald straightened up. "We're launching bias and service training. Not the checkbox kind either. Real training. We'll talk about what bias looks like, how it sounds, how it hides in jokes, in glances, in silence, and how dangerous it is, not just for customers, but for the people standing beside you in this room." One of the women in the back raised a hand. "Sir, are we being punished?" "No," Gerald said. "You're being given a second chance. But whether you take it seriously is up to you." He paused. "I'll be making unannounced visits. A lot of them. Not just to inspect, but to reconnect. Somewhere along the line, I forgot what it felt like to be treated like I don't belong. Today reminded me, and I'll never forget it again. There, was a shift in the room. Some eyes were softening now, some arms slowly uncrossing. "I know not everyone here messed up," he continued. "Some of you showed kindness that reminded me why I started this company. Denise at the register," he gestured, "and that young woman in clothing, they understood the assignment. They didn't know who I was. Didn't need to. They treated me like someone who mattered." Denise gave a small, stunned smile, and, "To the rest of you, I say this. We all carry something you don't see. We all walk in with stories, with burdens. And sometimes the people who look the most out of place are the ones who built the place." The room stayed silent, but it was no longer tense. It was reflective. "I've walked in your shoes," Gerald added. "I've stocked shelves, cleaned bathrooms, dealt with angry customers. I know what it's like, and that's why I know. It costs you nothing to treat someone with respect, but it costs everything when you don't." He took a deep breath, then softened his tone. "I'm not just here to bark orders and vanish. I'm going to listen too. I want you all to have a way to voice concerns about customers, about management, about each other. An anonymous channel. No judgment. If someone's behavior makes this place toxic, I want to know. And I will act on it." Brian stepped in then, speaking up for the first time in a while. "That starts today. I'll stay after this meeting to hear anyone who wants to speak in private. No punishment, no paperwork, just honesty." Gerald nodded in approval. Then he addressed them one last time. "We're not a perfect company. We've grown fast. Too fast, maybe. But fast growth doesn't give us permission to forget where we came from." He reached into his bag and pulled out a dusty laminated card. It was old, yellowed with time. "This is the original code of conduct I taped to the wall in my first store," he said. "Rule number 1? Treat everyone like your grandmother just walked in." That got a few soft chuckles. "I meant it then," Gerald said, folding the card back into his pocket. "And I mean it now." The room remained quiet as he turned toward the door, nodding once at Brian. But just before stepping out, he glanced over his shoulder. "And to those of you who judged me today based on how I looked, consider this your lesson. You never know who you're talking to." He left the room without looking back. As the door swung shut behind him, the sound of his footsteps echoed down the hallway. And for the first time all day, they weren't slow. They were firm, measured. A little heavy, maybe, but confident. He had lit a match in that room. Whether it became a fire or fizzled out would depend on the people inside. But one thing was certain. They'd never forget the day the homeless man turned out to be the owner. Gerald stepped outside into the fading Texas sunlight, his body tired but his mind sharper than it had felt in years. The heat pressed down on him, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts were spinning, not with regret, but with urgency. He had seen enough today to know this wasn't a one-store issue. This was systemic, and it had been allowed to grow in the blind spots of rapid success. He sat back in the station wagon, turned the engine on just enough for the AC to wheeze to life, and opened his notebook again. This time, he didn't just list problems. He outlined solutions. Mandatory bias and empathy training. 2. Anonymous employee feedback system. 3. Monthly unannounced walkthroughs. By me. 4. In-store culture audits conducted randomly. 5. Recognition system for acts of empathy. He paused, tapping his pen on the edge of the page. Rebuild the mission. From scratch. With the people. That last one gave him pause. The mission statement had once been simple. We see people. It had been born not in a boardroom, but on a sticky note taped to the back of the first cash register. It worked because it was real. But somewhere along the way, it had become a graphic on a training slide and nothing more. Empty words. Gerald closed the notebook and stared out at the storefront. Customers still walked in and out, some laughing, some scowling, some alone, some pushing carts packed with family needs. He wondered how many of them today had walked out feeling like he had. Unwelcome, dismissed, judged. He wouldn't let that continue. Not in his name. As he sat there, his phone buzzed. A message from one of his regional directors. A standard report. Clean numbers. Rising profits. Low staff turnover. A shallow graph that said everything was fine. Gerald almost laughed. Today had shown him the truth. You can't measure respect in a spreadsheet. He didn't respond. He put the phone aside and reached for something better. Action. Back inside, Brian had gathered the employees again, this time in smaller groups, less formal. Some looked shaken, others simply thoughtful. Gerald watched through the window from a distance. He didn't need to stand in front of them anymore. The message had landed. Now came the ripple effect. He walked back in, not as a customer, not undercover, but as himself. A few employees glanced up nervously. But Gerald didn't say a word to them. Instead, he walked straight to Denise at checkout. She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Matheson?" He smiled. "Just Gerald." She smiled back, a little embarrassed. "I hope I didn't do anything wrong." "You did everything right," he said. "You were the only reason I didn't leave this store heartbroken today." She lowered her eyes, humbled. "Thank you. I just try to treat people like people." Gerald reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a contact for my personal assistant. You're being transferred. Headquarters, customer experience team. You'll help me rebuild this thing from the inside out." Denise blinked. "Wait. Seriously?" "Dead serious," he said. "We need more people like you shaping the way we serve, from the ground up." For a second, she looked like she might cry. Then she nodded. "I won't let you down." "I know." Word spread quickly. By the time Gerald left the store again, employees were already whispering about what had happened, about the undercover CEO, the lessons learned, the cashier who got promoted. But Gerald didn't care about the gossip. He cared about the shift in the air, the awareness. The room that had once held indifference now held something heavier. Responsibility. Outside, the sky was turning a soft orange as the sun dipped lower. Gerald opened the trunk of his car, pulled out a different shirt, still old, still simple, but symbolic. He changed right there in the parking lot. No more disguise, no more test, just the man who built it all, coming back to save it. He walked toward the next store, 15 miles down the highway. No appointments, no warning. This wasn't a one-day fix. This was a movement, and he would lead it from the sidewalk, not the suite. The next store Gerald visited sat nestled in the heart of a town where people still waved at strangers. It was smaller than the Dallas location, more personal. He walked in wearing that same worn shirt, jeans, and now a baseball cap turned backward, against the sun. Nobody recognized him. Perfect. He wandered the aisles like any regular old man, browsing candles, picking up canned soup, occasionally pausing near families and listening to how employees responded. This time, the difference was striking. He was approached twice in the first 10 minutes. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" one asked. "You doing okay today?" another said with a soft smile. He was still dressed like someone living out of a car, but this time, he felt seen, treated humanely. Gerald smiled to himself. It hasn't all rotted, he thought. There's still good left to build from. He didn't linger, didn't pull anyone aside, just observed, took mental notes, and as he walked out, he left a small handwritten card behind on the customer service desk. It read, "Thank you for reminding me why I started this company. Gerald Matheson." By the time he returned to headquarters, he had visited 4 stores, driven hundreds of miles, and collected pages of insights. Some stories made him angry. Others gave him hope. But all of them lit a fire inside him that had been dimmed for years. He called a meeting with his executive team. No PowerPoint, no graphs, just a whiteboard and a thick black marker. On the board, he wrote in capital letters, "We forgot people. We remember now." Then he turned to his team and said, "We don't need rebranding. We need rerouting." They looked confused. He continued, "We've grown so much we lost our ground. We used to know our customers by name. Now we know them by loyalty points and return rates. We used to train our people how to connect. Now we train them how to sell." The silence in the room was heavy. One of the VPs finally spoke. "So what do we do?" "We rebuild from the floor up," Gerald said. "We revisit every policy, every metric, every expectation, not to boost numbers, to restore meaning." He spent the following weeks launching the biggest internal campaign the company had ever seen. Not for marketing, but for transformation. Bias training became mandatory, but taught with real stories, not scripts. Quarterly empathy reviews were introduced, where managers evaluated kindness, not just sales. Customer experience scouts, hand-picked from store-level employees like Denise, were flown in to help shape policy. Anonymous employee submissions became a goldmine of insight, exposing managers who bullied quietly and highlighting those who led with compassion. Mission days were introduced, once a month, where every employee, from executives to part-timers, had to work one full shift on the store floor. And Gerald? He didn't go back to his corner office. He set up a desk near the training center, dressed the same way as ever, still in sneakers, still in flannel. And every morning, employees from around the country came in and saw the man who started it all, not as a legend, but as a peer. News of the Undercover CEO spread, of course, viral videos, interviews, articles. But Gerald didn't bask in the spotlight. In fact, he barely gave quotes. Every time someone asked for his comment, he just said, "We messed up, we're fixing it, and we're not done yet." Denise, now part of the executive team for in-store culture, became a familiar face across locations. She wasn't just a token promotion. She became a symbol. Proof that kindness wasn't just appreciated, it was promoted. 1 year later, customer satisfaction ratings were up, but more importantly, so was trust. Employees began staying longer. People applied because they heard the company cared, not just about business, but about them. And Gerald? He kept the hoodie, sometimes wore it in meetings, not as a gimmick, but as a reminder of the day he walked into his own store and was treated like trash, a reminder of how close he came to losing what mattered most, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest rebuilds don't start with strategy. They start with heartbreak.